14-4 covers a very specific set of facts. Player's club strikes the ball more than once in the course of a stroke. Player must count the stroke and add a penalty stroke, making 2 strokes in all. So, for example, if on my second shot on a par 3, I'm playing a chip shot and I double or even triple hit it, what would I then be line? I would then be line 3. So I count the stroke I made and I add 1 penalty stroke. Now 14-5 is different because with 14-5 that talks about actually intentionally making a stroke at a ball in motion, whereas 14-4 is not. That second deflection is not intentional. 14-5 provides that a player must not make a stroke at his ball while it is moving, with some exceptions, such as ball falling off the tee, striking the ball more than once, or ball moving in water in the water hazard. So in other words, if you see your ball rolling out of bounds, you just have to stop, watch the ball go out of bounds. You can't play it before it goes out of bounds. When the ball begins to move only after the player has begun the stroke or the backward movement of this club for the stroke, he incurs no penalty under this rule for playing a moving ball, but he's not exempt from penalty under Rule 18-2. So what that means is that, and we'll cover Rule 18-2 next time, there's been an important change to that, but if a player's ball say lies in the fairway and he addresses the ball and then the ball immediately moves and the player plays the ball while the ball's in motion, that we know that there's no penalty under Rule 14-5 for playing a moving ball, but then the committee has to decide whether there's a penalty under Rule 18-2 for the player causing the ball to move. And we'll talk about next time the criteria for the committee to weigh in making that determination, that if they decide that that he did cause it to move, that he still has a 1-stroke penalty under that rule, but there's just no penalty for playing the ball while it's in motion because of when the motion ball actually started to move. Rule 14-6, the title's a little misleading. It's a that's right. There you go. Because as Ken says, the rule talks about a ball moving in water in a water hazard. Doesn't
I wouldn't say it fixed that. I mean, this I don't understand. 4 years ago, I caught the error. It's 4 years later, and they don't fix it.
Ken, I couldn't tell you. But you know, in case the chairman of the USGA's or RNA's Rules of Golf Committee is listening in, Ken suggests again that that the words "in a water hazard" be added to the title to Rule 14-6. When a ball's moving in water in a water hazard, the player may, without penalty, make a stroke, but he must not delay making the stroke in order to allow the wind current to improve the position of the ball. So, for example, if his ball, he can't position himself 5 feet behind the ball and wait for the ball to wind up downstream for him. The ball moving in water in a water hazard may be lifted if the player decides to use the water hazard rule. All right, so let's look at the decisions under Rule 14. Number of these we've already touched on. 14-1A/1, making stroke with back of club head, has a useful point in the answer. A player may make a stroke with any part of the club head, provided the ball is fairly struck at and the club conforms with Rule 4-1. So sometimes when you see players around the greens, you see them make a putt with the toe of their putter, and that's okay too for that reason. We looked at several decisions under 14-1B. Then let's see. Let's see. We have not yet looked at 14-3/10.3, but it's we're just talking during the break about possible reasons why the penalty on Rule 14-3 was reduced. And we all see so many high school and college players with a alignment rod in their bags, and it's amazing that players have not so far really seemed to have pulled those out during the round. As if they pulled it out during the round, that would be to use for alignment or for some other way, that would be a breach of the rules. And this decision clarifies the situation. During a stipulated round, may a player use a rod or similar device to check his alignment or his swing plane? No, he'd be using an artificial device or unusual equipment in breach of Rule 14-3. Carrying the rod is not of itself a breach of a rule. So what's helpful with this decision is if you wind up having to penalize a player, that doesn't hurt to have a specific decision you can point to and say, well, this specifically says that what you've done is a breach of the rules. 14-3/17 is a somewhat new and different position regarding listening to music or some other radio broadcast during a round. And it holds that listening to music while making a stroke or for a prolonged period of time during a stipulated round is a breach of Rule 14. Excuse me, Rule 14-3. However, it would not be a breach for a player to listen to a device briefly, for example, to obtain the results of a sporting event or traffic information between holes. And ultimately, the committee will have to consider all available facts and circumstances in determining whether a player using an artificial device to listen to music has done so for a long period, such that the action might have assisted him in his play. So bottom line is you can't listen to music anymore during the round. And I think that took effect I think that was made 2012. Let's see. Decision 14-5/2 is a good one to know because it confirms that there is no penalty if a player makes a stroke at an oscillating ball. That Rule 14-5 prohibits making a stroke at a moving ball, and just saying that an oscillating ball is not one that is moving. So therefore, if you have a player calls you over saying, look, I don't think I can play because this ball is moving, you just say, no, it's oscillating, and there's no penalty for making a stroke at the ball in such circumstances. All right, any questions on Rule 14? All right, on to Rule 15, which covers two topics, a substituted ball, and there are incorrect and correct substitutions, and then play of a wrong ball. And we'll go through several examples because, as we'll see, there's a very different penalty and procedure for play of an incorrectly substituted ball and play of a wrong ball. And so it's important to know the distinction between the two. Rule 15-1 just states the principle that the player must hole out with the ball played from the teeing ground. Rule 15-2 tells us what to do when he substitutes balls. In other words, he replaces ball A with ball B and holds out. And sometimes that substitution is permitted, such as under the water hazard rule. Other times that substitution is not permitted, such as under the obstruction rule. If you take relief from a cart path, as we'll see, you have to drop and play the original ball. You're not allowed to substitute balls. Player may substitute a ball when proceeding under a rule that permits substitution, which makes sense. And the substitute ball becomes the ball in play, which means the original ball is out of play. If a player substitutes the ball when not permitted to do so under the rules, that substitute ball is not a wrong ball, it becomes the ball in play. And notice that parenthetical statement there, which is an addition for this year, really intended to help clarify the situation. That says, including an unintentional substitution when a wrong ball is dropped or placed by the player. So let's take a case, for example, where a player hits his ball off the fairway. He finds a ball he thinks is his, and it's located such that if you were to play the ball as it lies, you'd be standing on a cart path. So he lifts the ball he found, and then he dropped it, taking relief from the cart path, and he plays it. And then he realizes that was not his ball. So the first question is, has he played a wrong ball? Answer is no, he has not. He would have played a wrong ball if he had simply gone up and played the ball without ever having touched it. But as soon as he dropped it, that ball became the ball in play and was a substitute ball. It was not his original ball. So then the committee will have to determine what his procedure is. And in such a case, is there any rule that allowed the player to drop and play a ball? What was he required to do at that point when he didn't know where his original ball was? Go stroke and distance back to the tee. So in match play, the player is going to lose the hole. In stroke play, the player will have done what? He'll have played from a wrong place under the lost ball rule. And if this was his tee shot, there's a fair chance that was also a serious breach of playing from a wrong place, in which case he would be disqualified unless he corrects that mistake before teeing off on the next hole. So that's a case where an example of an unintentional substitution when a wrong ball is dropped. That is no longer a wrong ball, it becomes a substituted ball in play. So if this mistake, the improper substitution, is not corrected as Rule 20-6 allows, and the player makes a stroke at the incorrectly substituted ball, he loses the hole in match play or incurs a penalty of 2 strokes in stroke play under the applicable rule, and stroke play must play out the hole with the substituted ball. All right, so let's look at an example of that. Let's say a player finds his ball, and it is his ball, and it's on a cart path, and he elects to take relief under the obstruction rule. That rule requires him to drop and play the original ball, but instead he notices that the ball was scratched, but it's definitely not unfit for play, and he substitutes balls. So he, instead of dropping the original ball, he drops and plays a different ball under the obstruction rule. So there he is improperly substituted balls. So match play, you lose the hole. In stroke play, it's a penalty of 2 strokes under the applicable rule. Now, in that case, what would the applicable rule be? It'd be Rule 24-2, because Rule 24-2 is the rule that told him to lift and drop the ball. So by substituting balls, he is in breach of Rule 24-2. And he will play out the hole with that ball. Exception, if a player incurs a penalty for making a stroke from a wrong place, there is no additional penalty for substituting when not permitted. So in that cart path example, if a player did everything wrong, if he improperly substituted balls and he dropped in the wrong place and played, in stroke play, he'd get a total penalty of just 2 strokes.
You can't get away with saying that you get sick. You can't say, oh God, yeah, that's right, I can't substitute it. You can't erase that.
Oh, you can correct that mistake before you play. So let's say, for example, Bill and I are playing together, and Bill sees me substitute balls when taking relief from the cart path. Then after I drop, but before I play, Bill says, "John, hold on, you can't do that. You need to drop the original ball." Then I can correct that mistake, and it's a good question, because then what are the mechanics of correcting that mistake? Do I simply swap out the balls on the ground, or do I drop the original ball? And the answer is actually I start all over and I drop the original ball. So that's how I correct that mistake. But you're absolutely right. I am able to correct that mistake.
Your example of picking up a wrong ball, taking relief from a cart path, dropping it after your tee shot, could you go through the mechanics of that? Yeah. So I hit a tee shot.
Okay.
I walk up. I find a ball that I think is mine. I have interference from a cart path with the
Okay.
ball that I think is mine. I correctly calculate my point relief, drop within a club length, and now someone says, hey, that's not your ball.
Oh, but I haven't played it yet.
Right?
Oh, okay. So back to the example where I find a wrong ball near a cart path. I lift it, I drop it, taking relief, but before I play it, my original ball is found. Then what do I do? You're right. Then I would go play my original ball,
and there would be no penalty whatsoever.
and there's no penalty in that case because I haven't made a stroke. I didn't make a stroke at a wrong ball, and I haven't yet played an incorrectly substituted ball, and I haven't yet played from the wrong place. All right, now 15-3, and we'll look at some decisions regarding all this after we finish this next section. Wrong ball, which as we'll see is treated very differently than a substituted ball. Match play, if a player makes a stroke at a wrong ball, he loses the hole. If the wrong ball belongs to another player, its owner must place the ball in the spot from which the wrong ball was first played. So this would really come into play. This second sentence really wouldn't matter in a singles match. It would matter more in, let's say, a 4-ball match. And if the player and opponent exchange balls during play of a hole, the first to make a stroke at a wrong ball loses the hole. And then an exception for a extremely specific situation. There's no penalty if a player plays a wrong ball that's moving in water in a water hazard. And the reason for that is if the ball's moving in water in a water hazard, then the player is unable to lift the ball to identify it under Rule 12-2. So if there isn't a way for the player to protect himself, then we can't penalize the player for playing such a ball. But has anyone heard of that actually happening?
No.
All right, stroke play. Play a wrong ball, whether it's one or more strokes, incur a 2-stroke penalty, and then you must correct that mistake by playing the correct ball or by proceeding under the rules. Now, and if you don't correct that mistake in a timely manner, you are disqualified. Timely manner meaning before you play from the next teeing ground, or if it's the last hole before leaving that putting green, declaring your intention to correct that mistake. You are disqualified. So this is the third situation we've come across in stroke play where a player must correct a mistake in a timely manner or be disqualified, with rules 3-2, failure to hole out in stroke play, and 11-4B, playing from outside the teeing ground, being the other two situations. And it may help to think about in terms of this, that if you think about this is really just an extension of that requirement under Rule 3-2. If you play a wrong ball and never correct your mistake, you never hold out with a ball in play. So it's really just a continuation of Rule 3-2 and failure to hole out in a stroke play. So the rule says once you play a wrong ball, you correct it. You must correct it by playing the correct ball. So, for example, I'm in the rough. I find ball X, I play it, and I realize that was not my ball. Then I find my ball, and then I play my ball. But then the question is, what happens? I play a wrong ball, and then I never find my ball. Well, this is why it says, or by proceeding under the rules. So let's take a par 4 hole. I hit my tee shot into the trees, go forward, search for it. I find a ball. I think it's mine. I assume it's mine, and I play it. Then I get out of the trees and I realize it's not my ball. Go back, look more, but I can't. I never find my original ball. Now, what's my procedure in that case? Now, my original, in addition to having played a wrong ball, I now have a lost ball, so I have to return to the tee under stroke and distance. So then, what would I be playing from the tee? Well, let's see. I've got my original tee shot. That stroke counts. Then I have 2 penalty strokes for playing a wrong ball and 1 more penalty stroke for having a lost ball. So I'd be playing my 5th stroke from the tee in such a case. So it's just useful to remember that sometimes correcting the mistake could involve something like stroke and distance. So it's not always going to be as simple as just finding your ball and playing it.
I hate to pick on teams for events, but I'm not kidding you, 10 to 15 times a year this will happen. And I'm not exaggerating. You know, someone will come in and say, I hit it, you know, there'll be two holes that are parallel to each other. And player A will hit a ball into the right rough, which is also the right rough of the adjacent hole. And it will go up and search for the ball, and it'll turn out that somebody going down the other hole will have played the wrong ball. And now the question becomes, what is the timing aspect of that ball becoming lost, or there being evidence that an outside agency moved the ball at rest, a player's ball that was in play? Certainly the guy going down the other hole played a wrong ball, that's easy. But it's not so easy for the player that played his original ball and someone else played it. And I was wondering if you could kind of
Yeah, I know
talk
that's
about
a
that.
tough case. As Bill says, let's say, for example, I hit a wild hook onto a parallel fairway, and a player over there plays my ball, and maybe I see him do it, maybe I don't. And then I get over there and I can't find my ball. So know that the player on the other hole, he's played a wrong ball, and Rule 15-3 applies to him. So the question is, what happens to me? Um, uh, do I have to proceed as if I have a lost ball, or am I allowed some sort of remedy without penalty? And it comes down to whether it was known or virtually certain that you had played my ball. That if I see you, if I, for example, take the black and white case, I see my ball come to rest in the other fairway, then I see you play it, then it's known. It's known that someone else has played it. So then, as this rule states, that it's if the long ball belongs to another competitor, its owner must place the ball in the spot from which the long ball was first played. So we know then what I would do. But the difficult thing is what happens. I get over there and I didn't see you play it. I didn't even know for sure when my ball came to rest. You did played it, but it looks like it's let's say it's 50-50 if that, whether that could have happened. That I'm going to need more evidence to proceed this way. In such a case, I might have to, if it's a senior tour event, we're probably in carts, ride up uh, to that group and say, hey, one of you having to play a Titleist 2 with orange dots on it.
And I guess my question is, usually, from my experience, what happens is they'll look for 5 minutes. Then once 5 minutes is up and they can't find it, then it's starting to look for the excuses.
Okay.
Yeah.
And my question is, once that 5 minutes is up, if I go back and I discover within 8 minutes, let's just take an extreme example, that somebody in an outside agency played my ball, another player. Is it too late for me to simply place the ball on the spot from which? Because even though I searched for 5 minutes, it became known that before that 5 minutes was up, after 5 minutes was up, I discovered that someone else played my ball. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. Here, there's a decision that touches on that.
Thing, but
yeah, here we go.
Frequently.
Yeah, and it's a good question. Let's look at decision 27/7 on page 434. That's a similar principle. Player's tee shot comes to rest in an area containing heavy rough and a large burning animal hole. After a search of 5 minutes, the players determine that it's not known or virtually certain the ball is in the burning animal hole. The player returns to the tee to put another ball into play. As the player is returning to the tee, the ball is found in a burning animal hole. May he now proceed under Rule 25 without penalty? No. When 5 minutes elapsed, and at that moment it was not known or virtually certain the ball was in the burning animal hole, the ball was lost, and Rule 27 applied. So what that says is at that 5 minute mark, what do you know? That if at 5 minutes, if you don't have sufficient evidence, another player played it, you have to proceed under stroking distance.
So we, usually in the case that I bring up, the guy's best bet, if he doesn't find it after a very brief search, is to go, basically become the accuser.
Yeah.
I mean,
Sounds like you have pretty good reason to think that he is.
but I'm not kidding you, it happens frequently. It's astonishing.
Well, and then what's funny, inevitably, and occasionally you're going to find the other player who played his ball and say, no, I didn't do that. No,
Well,
I happen to have white BL on my balls too. What a coincidence. 27/7.
434.
Oh,
34.
Oh,
I got it.
all right. And then we'll, with this, where we talk about a case where one player plays another player's ball, and this rule says its owner must place a ball, so substitutions allowed on the spot from which the wrong ball was first played. This will lead nicely into our discussion, the next session of Rule 20, which will talk about how you actually go about doing that. When, for example, that original spot is not where it's not known exactly where the ball is played from, or if it is known but the lie was altered through that stroke that was made of the wrong ball, how the player will proceed. So let's look at some decisions under 15. 15/5. A player is unable to find his ball after a brief search and drops another ball under 27-1 and plays it. His original ball is then found within 5 minutes. Well, based on the definition of lost ball, what's the status of his original ball at that point? Yeah, it's lost. That under in the answer, second sentence of the answer makes an important point. When the player put the substituted ball into play at the spot of the previous stroke with the intent to play a ball under Rule 27-1, he proceeded under an applicable rule. So it's a case where the intent to proceed under stroking distance matters. So therefore, the rules allowed him to do what he did. He did nothing wrong, so Rule 20-6, the so-called eraser rule, does not apply, and the player must continue with the drop ball. But it goes on to say, with what the player wound up lifting that ball that he dropped and played and continued to play the original ball. All right, well, when he played the original ball, what has he done? He's played a long ball. And when he lifted ball B, what had he done? He had lifted his ball in play. So when the player lifted ball B, he incurred a penalty of 1 stroke under Rule 18-2 for lifting his ball in play. When he made a stroke at the original that was out of play, he played a wrong ball. So here's a case where he's played a wrong ball and must correct his mistake. So in this case, how would he go about correcting that mistake? It would be by replacing ball B with that penalty stroke. All right, decision 15/6. Player hits his tee shot out of bounds, finds his ball, and then plays that ball that's lying out of bounds. What's the ruling? Well, we know from the definition of ball in play that a ball that's out of bounds is no longer in play. So therefore, if the player plays it, he has played a wrong ball. And how would he, in stroke play, how would he correct his mistake? By proceeding under Rule 27-1, stroking distance. All right, now we'll look at a pair of decisions, 15/13 and /14. Player finds a ball he believes is his original ball, deems it unplayable, and drops it under Rule 28B or C. He then discovers the ball is not his, but it's in fact a stray ball. What's the ruling? All right, well, in this case, The important point is the player has not yet played the ball, so he can correct his mistake. When the player dropped the straight ball, it became a substitute ball. However, he was entitled to proceed under Rule 28B or C without having found the original ball, because those two options of the unplayable ball rule require the player to take relief with reference to the location of the original ball. Now, so the player is entitled to correct this mistake under Rule 20-6 by abandoning the substitute ball and resuming search for the original ball. And if it turns out the ball is lost, the player must proceed under Rule 27-1. So there's no penalty for simply dropping and playing this stray ball under an inapplicable rule. The key is that this player has not yet played. Now, next decision is really the same set of facts, except the player plays the drop ball. So let's walk through that. First the answer starts off by saying, well, the player could have and should have protected himself. Since the location of the original ball was not known at the time the substitute ball was dropped, the player was required to proceed under Rule 27-1. As the substitute ball was not dropped at the spot required by that rule, he played from the wrong place. So this is really the same situation as when I found that stray ball near the cart path and I dropped and played it under the obstruction rule, and it turned out not to be my ball. I played from the wrong place with respect to the lost ball rule, and in match play, lose the hole. In stroke play, I'll incur 1 penalty stroke for using the lost ball rule, 2 penalty strokes for playing from the wrong place, and then if the breach was a serious one, which is likely, I must correct that mistake or be disqualified. All right, decision 15-3B/2 is an interesting one to note, with a player who's a little slow. Player plays a wrong ball to a putting green. He gets up to the green, discovers the error, and returns to the spot from which the wrong ball was played. He finds another ball and plays it to the green. He then discovers that he's played another wrong ball. Is the penalty 2 strokes or 4 strokes? 4 strokes. The discovery that he had played a wrong ball is an intervening event that breaks the relationship between the 2 strokes. In other words, once he realized that he'd played a wrong ball, the penalty clock starts over, because at that moment he is obligated to proceed correctly, which he did not do. So he incurred a total penalty of 4 strokes and still must correct that mistake. Any questions on Rule 15? What's that? Avoid it. All right, on to Rule 16, the putting green. 16-1A. The line of putt must not be touched. And we follow with 7 exceptions, which tends to dilute the rule, but don't lose sight of the fact that the overall premise is you can't touch your line of putt. So this is different than Rule 13-2, which talks about improving, for example, your line of play. Rule 16-1A discusses merely touching your line of putt, even if there's no improvement. Now for the exceptions, the times you may touch your line of putt. You can remove loose impediments from it. You can place the club in front of the ball when addressing it. When measuring, for example, perhaps using the flag stick to determine the order of play. In lifting or replacing the ball, and pressing down a ball marker, and repairing a ball marker old hole plug, or in removing movable obstructions. So with all that, sometimes you see players go up on their line of putt and take practice swings, perhaps on the apex of the putt, to get a feel for how the putt will break. If they do that, as long as they don't touch the putting green itself, usually that's okay. But if they touch the putting green while doing so, that is an issue. And a concern these days is, I don't know, sure a lot of you have seen at especially college events, the so-called aim point method for green reading, where players will stand either behind or sometimes straddling their line of putt and try to get a feel with their feet for which way the ground slopes and hold up fingers to try to determine how much break to play and all that. Yeah, you look good, Dan. And the questions come up, well, is that a breach of Rule 16-1A? Are they touching their line of putt? And there's definitely the potential for that, and whether it is a breach depends as to exactly what they do. And a lot of it depends as to just how wide we say a line of putt is. Remember, in definitions, we said line of putt's the line the player wishes his ball to take, plus a reasonable distance on either side. So if that has a very narrow interpretation, then in most cases the player would be okay. If it has a wider interpretation, in some cases he would not be okay with that. But I know it sounds like it's something that the RNA and the USGA are very much aware of. 16-1B, this allows the player to lift and clean his ball from the putting green. He does need to mark its position, though. When another ball is in motion, the ball might influence the movement of the ball in motion, must not be lifted. So if my ball's on the putting green and I see Bill's ball coming towards it, I may not lift my ball in hopes that Bill's ball will miss it and go in the bunker. 16-1C. Well, we know from 16-1A that the player is allowed to repair old hole plugs and ball marks on the putting green on his line of putt. And then 16-1C allows him to repair hole plugs and ball marks elsewhere on the putting green. So it could be, for example, beyond the hole, where he thinks that if he misses, his ball might wind up. So it's okay to do that. Notice that when you combine 16-1A and 16-1C, that there's no allowance for repairing any other sort of damage to the putting green, whether it's spike damage or animal damage or what have you. Rule 16-1D, testing the surface. During the round, the player must not test the surface of any putting green by rolling a ball or roughening or scraping the surface. So notice it says any putting green. So that means, for example, if you're walking down hole number 1, you can't go over to the 8th green nearby and roll a ball to see how that's going to play in an hour and a half. An exception between holes, a player may test the surface of a practice putting green and the putting green of the hole last played unless the committee's prohibited that. And why is that allowed? Well, this Rule 7-2 allows the player to make actual practice strokes in such circumstances. And this is an intent-based rule. You look at decision 16-1D as in David/2 for an example. A player concedes his opponent's next stroke, knocks his ball away on the same line on which he must subsequently putt. Is this a breach of Rule 16-1D? The answer is a question of fact whether the player's action was for the purpose of testing the surface of the putting green. So if it was for that purpose, it would be a breach. If it was not for that purpose, it would not be a breach. All right, Rule 16-1E. A player must not make a stroke on the putting green from a stance of stride or with either foot touching the line of putt or an extension of that line behind the ball. But with an exception that there's no penalty if the stance is inadvertently taken on or astride the line of putt, meaning that the player was not trying to do that, or if it was taken intentionally, but for the purpose of avoiding standing on another player's line of putt. So if Dan and I are playing together in stroke play, and I hit my first putt up near the hole, and I want to go ahead and tap in, but do so without standing in Dan's line, and if I intentionally straddle the extension of the line behind the ball, that's okay for this reason. 16-1F, making stroke while another ball is in motion. Player must not make a stroke while another ball is in motion after a stroke from the putting green, except if the player does so, there's no penalty if it was his turn to play. So let's look at two examples of that. Let's say that Arnold and I are playing together, and Arnold is on the putting green 30 feet from the hole, and I am off the putting green 20 feet from the hole. Arnold putts while his ball is in motion. I play from off the putting green. Is there any breach there? Yes, I am in breach of the rules. Even though I was off the putting green, that doesn't matter. The bottom line is Arnold had played from the putting green while his ball was in motion. I played, and it was not originally my turn to play. So I would be penalized. Now let's take the case where, let's say Arnold and I are both on the putting green. I'm 20 feet from the hole. Arnold is 30 feet from the hole, and I for some reason go ahead and putt. And Arnold is really grinding over his 30-footer, is not aware that I putted, and he goes ahead and putts while my ball is in motion. Now, would Arnold incur a penalty in that case? Answer is no, because why? Because it was his turn to play originally. All right, penalty for breach of Rule 16-1. So for each section, whether it's touching your line of putt, failing to replace a ball that's been lifted under Rule 16-1B, repairing other damage, testing the surface, so forth, is the general penalty. All right, Rule 16-2, ball overhanging the hole. When any part of a ball overhangs the lip, the player is allowed enough time to reach the hole without unreasonable delay and an additional 10 seconds to determine whether the ball is at rest. If by then the ball is not fallen into the hole, it's deemed to be at rest. If the ball subsequently falls into the hole, the player is deemed to have holed out with his last stroke and must add a penalty stroke to his score. When you look at all that, let's go through some examples. Let's say I hit a putt from 20 feet, ball comes to rest overhanging the lip of the hole. And that's one point. This rule applies only to a ball overhanging the lip. It doesn't apply to a ball that's a quarter of an inch from the hole. It applies only when the ball is actually overhanging the lip of the hole. So I walk to the hole, and then I wait 8 seconds. And let's say it's a par 3, and I was putting for a 32. Wait 8 seconds, and the ball falls into the hole. My score for the hole is 2. Now I wait 12 seconds, and in 12 seconds, the ball falls into the hole. What would my score for the hole be? It'd be 3. 2 strokes I made, then 1 penalty stroke for the ball falling in after 10 seconds. Now, let's say I get to the hole, I wait 12 seconds, nothing's happened, and then I tap in the putt. And what's my score for the hole? 3. So what that means is that after the 10 seconds has expired, that there's no incentive to wait any longer. Because whether I tap in or the ball falls in on its own, the result would be the same, 1 more stroke. And with this rule, it's important to keep in mind you don't start the 10-second count until the player reaches the hole. So there could be quite a difference there, that if I have a 40-foot putt, that's going to take me more time to reach the hole than if I have a 10-foot putt, or even you could have a case where it could happen with a 150-yard approach shot, I suppose. But so those times are variable, but in either case, once you get to the hole, it is 10 seconds.
John, administrative question for you. You said when talking about endpoints that the WSGA and the RNA are aware that this is an issue. What would they do aside from changing a rule or making a decision regarding it? What would they do between those changes?
It's a good question. I'm not sure exactly what the discussions have been with the SGA and RNA about aim point. That, it sounds like they're quite aware of it, and they certainly think there could be a concern with the rules, and that there could be some methods that could result in a breach. And I'm not sure if they've had discussions with Aimpoint to say you really need to discourage players from doing this because this would be a breach, what have you. So I think, short of a rule change, I'm not sure if all you could do. Maybe some more videos and diagrams. I'm not sure, but it's a difficult question. A lot of it, as we said, depends as to what a reasonable amount means in definition. It's I don't know. It's interesting. It'll be interesting to see what ultimately happens. Since Bill hasn't teed that up for me here, I'll go ahead and mention it. But in simplegolfrules.com, for example, the suggestion is just to eliminate Rule 16-1A and just let Rule 13-2 govern. Say there's no penalty for touching your line of putt as long as you don't improve it. Could that fall under measuring? Whose payroll are you on? No. That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. Or measuring? I think what the USGA would probably say is that measuring means distance. No, you're good. No, you're right. I haven't heard anybody raise that point. Yeah, Gene.
Question on testing the surface. A few years ago, I was playing along with a match for a club championship. I was not one of the considered as a fellow player. And on the third hole, player A has a ball, he marks it, and there's some soil attached, so he picks it up and he rubs it on the green surface and sets it back down. And player B's opponent says, I think you're testing the surface. And he said, no, I said, crap, I just cleaned it. He said, I'll be careful about that. The rule, About 6 or 7 holes later, same thing happened. Same player marks the ball. Player B says, I'm calling you on testing the surface, and you use the hole. And he said, I didn't test the surface. I was cleaning my ball. So he said, well, I challenge that. So now the question is, who makes the decision? Well, the golf pro has got to make the decision. So they call him, and he comes out at that, and he's not there, and he listens to both sides, and then he asks me if I observed it. Yes, I did. He said, what do you think? I said, I don't want to make an opinion on this. And but I said, you have to take the man at his word. If he said he wasn't testing, that's a matter of fact. And so he ruled that there was no penalty. And player A really questioned that. And I'm just curious, because he had called him on it a few holes earlier, and then he did it again. But where's the fact remain?
All right. So the question involves a player who, on several holes, wipes his ball on the putting green, in his words, to clean the ball. And the question is he in breach of Rule 16-1D? And, Gene, I think you're right that it's really just a question of fact. Why did he rub the ball on the putting green? That rubbing the ball on the green to clean it's a perfectly legitimate and normal thing to do. If you don't have a towel on you, you don't want to wipe it on your socks or your trousers or whatever. That's a very reasonable thing to do. And it depends on that. These days, I tend not to get that excited about this rule, in part because at the mowing heights these days, there's not really grain on the greens, so it's not as if the player's really going to learn anything from that. But I think all you can do is ask the player, why did you do that, and go and take him at his word.
So we did even though the player question out of the decision.
All right, let's look at a few decisions.
Measuring is an activity for children to practice finding light.
Measuring is an activity for children. Who said for children?
Well, actually, the definition of measuring is finding distances, volume, et cetera.
Oh, etc. So or you can, yeah. Well, that's pretty interesting. That's kind of an interesting point. Pretty interesting, Dan. What do you think about that? I agree.
It doesn't surprise me that the USGA doesn't have its words like that.
All right, one decision that's it's kind of curious and it's one to be aware of is 16-1A/12. A player walked on his line of putt. Did he incur a penalty for breach of Rule 16-1A? Yes, if he did so intentionally. No, if he did so accidentally, and the act did not improve the line. So sometimes you can have the player just is not aware he's on the green and accidentally walks across his line of putt. If it was accidental and he did improve the line, no penalty.
Why
So
would
if he's
16
jumping across his line and he miscalculates and lands on his line, that would not be a penalty.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, if he's trying to jump across his line and miscalculates, yeah, since that'd be accidental.
Given that
It
decision,
is.
Well, but if he
Improve.
yeah, if he worsens his line of putt, then there's no penalty.
And then for the 8-point part, they're not, the tour player's not gonna intentionally cut the line.
Yeah, well, you see, and I think that's a very good point, Colin. That's what I think. The advocates would argue, say, wait a minute, I'm not going to stand where I'm trying to putt. I'm just hurting myself. So,
given decision 16-1A/12, why is Rule 16-1A not read the line of putt must not be purposely cut?
well, and that's a good question, Bill, in terms of why the rule itself does not use the word intentionally, and that's and it's a curious decision. That's why I pointed out, because it on the surface seems to be in conflict with the rule itself, because the rule itself seems to be intent free, just to say, hey, if you touch your line of putt, it's a penalty.
Just one of those things.
Yeah.
Talk about improving.
Right.
So,
No. It just says, did he incur a penalty for walking on his line of putt? And the answer is, if he did it on purpose or intentionally, he's penalized. If he did it accidentally, he's not penalized.
no, accidentally and does not improve.
But that,
You know the history of that decision?
my sense is it's been around for a long time.
How long?
My guess is decades. I mean, it could well be 30, 40, 50 years. I don't know.
I question it because about 25 years ago, we had a young player at the WSGA Junior Championship, and on his last hole, his parents are there watching him, and he's got about a 20-footer. He has a 2-putt to make the cut to qualify for match play, and so he really looks over his putt, crosses back and forth, and takes different angles and so forth. Putts up there, 2 putts, makes the putt, and mom and dad come out and hug him and that because they're so happy that he qualified. A rules official comes up and says, you are penalized from shot because you walked in your line. And he said, well, if I did it inadvertently, yeah. He said, I'm sorry, but I witnessed this from 100 yards away or whatever there, and assessed him 2 strokes, and he lost his opportunity to qualify. I had called Tom to Frank Hannigan at the time and mentioned to him about this situation. I thought it was very unfair ruling, and especially when the guy's 100 yards away or 100 feet away, whatever he was, to recognize whether or not he really walked in his line like that. And but the rule stood and he stood out, and I was wondering if this decision had taken place.
I know this decision's been around for at least, say, 25 years. and be on.
About when it was.
Well, I said at least, but what the history is, I don't know. And my concern with it is, and I think you could say that it's the rule doesn't support it.
Well, I know that
Which-
official was not invited to participate in for the rule.
So, but let's see with the rest of. Yeah, I'll just point out, we won't go over, but 16-2/4 and /5, the last two decisions, as you can tell, are fairly involved. And they're the type of decision that you don't necessarily need to know them off the top of your head, but you just need to know that they exist so that if a ruling comes up with a player removing the flagstick from the hole with the ball overhanging lip and the ball moves, that you know where to go for the answer. And that's the case with a lot of decisions. It's not necessarily the key of memorizing the answer, but is with some decisions just knowing the fact that there is a decision, knowing where you can quickly find the answer is helpful. So, any questions on Rule 16? Yeah.
I like to walk up to I like to get out of the car and walk up to the green. So I'm maybe standing close to the green, my ball 5-7 feet off the green. And one of the guys I'm playing with, 150 yards away, gets the ball on the green. Okay, 2 feet behind the hole. Now, see this on TV where both almost, go ahead, shoot my ball with the hand stuff. Instead of chipping the ball 10, 12 feet by the hole, you might chip the ball. Now you put away. Is that okay for us?
Well, I guess the first thing I'd say is there's one, the rules are the same obviously for both amateur and professional golf, and we'll get into this next time with Rule 22 that provides that in stroke play, if the players agree not to lift a ball for the purpose of giving one of them an advantage, they're disqualified. So that's if there's an agreement. But in your case, if, say, the players played from far away and he hasn't yelled out, "Hey, hold on, I want to lift my ball," and you go ahead and play, the two of you haven't agreed to do that, and that's okay. But
So after reading that decision, I asked myself if the tour doesn't seem to have an implied waiving of the rules by the very fact that they never proceed to mark their ball under those circumstances, when they're a lot closer to the ball than the situation that Bob described.
I'm sorry, was there a question?
Well,
Yeah.
response, I like that. My question is, I'm bothered by this. Every time we have a meeting, I ask the same question. It bothers me by the fact that, and I assume that the purpose is not to delay play.
Well, what's interesting is that some people who watch a lot of professional golf seem to think that players do leave their balls on the green a lot when they're in a position to help a fellow competitor. And what's interesting, and I still haven't quite kind of cracked the code, but on the professional level, there are times when the players seem to watch each other like hawks. And then there are times when they seem to be each other's buddies, saying, "Oh yeah, I'm sure your ball went in the hazard. It must have crossed right up here by the green," or they leave balls near the hole without saying anything. And I don't quite understand when they try to beat each other's brains out and when they're nice to each other. I don't. But all I can say is I do think that the Rule 22, which we'll get to next time, is pretty clear on the matter, and I'm not sure. I've never really talked to a tour official to see what their thoughts are, whether they think players are really doing that, or if the players are really just trying to help with the pace of play and keep moving. But it's interesting on a personal level. Uh, I wouldn't mind if that rule were changed. That I know some people it just drives them nuts the thought of using a ball as a backstop. But to my way of thinking, it's like I think, well, couldn't you argue that you're just playing the course as you find it? That ball was behind the hole before you played, so okay, maybe got a good break. Is that a bad thing? I don't know. And then Kyle, your question is what if two partners could agree with the ball there? Well, in stroke play, in four-ball stroke play, they cannot do that. They would be disqualified. And then what's interesting, we don't want to get too much into this, but in match play, we'll see next time that there's no penalty. Because in match play, say if Ken and I are playing a match against each other, and Ken, being crafty person that he is, says, "John, leave the ball behind the hole. I want to use it as a backstop," and I dare not disagree with him, and I do that. Well, I just have myself to blame. Whereas in stroke play, there could be 154 other people that are annoyed that Ken got an advantage there. So that's why in stroke play you can't do that.
That agreement that they talk about under Rule 22, does that have to be verbal?
Does the agreement under Rule 22 need to be verbal? It does not need to be verbal, but that certainly makes it black and white. That you could certainly, you could imagine a case where the players have done that. There's been some sort of communication, whether with eyes, with facial expressions, hand gestures, where it's clear that they agreed not to lift it.
Slow motion, high definition TV.
Yeah.
It has to be actual, it can't be constructed. It has to be an actual agreement. It can be by non-belief, but you can't have an implied agreement and that sort of thing.
Correct. No implied agreement. It has to be an actual agreement. Yeah, Gene.
As an official, and you're witnessing this happening, and player A hits the ball out of a bunker and puts it up there 3 feet past the hole. Player B is on the fringe, and player B now is going to run up and hit his shot because the ball is there and assist him in case it goes on. As an official, and you witness this, and without telling, would you be obligated or right to go up and say, hole play, have him mark that ball?
Well, I think all the rule really prohibits is players from agreeing to leave a ball in position. The rule doesn't prohibit a player from using a ball as a backstop. You just can't do it as an agreement with the ball's owner. So as an official, I don't think it would be appropriate to intervene in that case. I know there is a decision under Rule 22 that touches on that. Yeah, decision 22/7. It touches on this that that says, however, the competitor does not take any action to invoke the rule. Would a referee be justified in intervening and requesting the competitor to invoke the rule to protect himself and the rest of the field? The answer is yes. And if the competitor were to object, there'd be strong evidence of an agreement not to lift the ball. So, based on that, then, if in certain circumstances that it could well be.
Well, the referee would be. Could do that, right?
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah.
Right. You're right.
All right. So
the rule of match play, if the player has control of both balls.
All right. All right. So, any questions on Rule 16? All right. If not, we'll cover Rule 17 and call it a day. 17 deals with the flag stick. So this rule is conveniently paired with the putting green rule. And the flag stick, we'll see, is a movable obstruction, but it's one that has a special status and has its own rule. 17-1 tells us what the player's options are with regards to the flag stick. And that is before making the stroke from anywhere on the course. So this could apply even when the ball is off the putting green. The player may have the flag stick attended, removed, or held up to indicate the position of the hole. And one thing to keep in mind is when the flag stick's being held up in these circumstances, it must be held up directly above the hole. The player or the person holding it up, for example, just can't go to the edge of the green and stay there during the stroke. Because the stay during the stroke It has to be held up above it. Now, if the flag stick is not attended, removed, or held up before the stroke, then it must not be attended, removed, or held up during the stroke or while the ball is in motion if doing so might influence the movement of the ball. Not that it actually does influence, but it might influence. And we'll look at a decision or two for an example of that. Let's see, some notes. That aren't particularly earth-shattering. 17-2, unauthorized attendance. Now, if an opponent or fellow competitor, without the player's authority or knowledge, attends, removes, or holds up the flag stick during the stroke or while the ball is in motion, and this act might influence movement of the ball, the opponent or fellow competitor incurs the applicable penalty. So if Bill and I are fellow competitors in stroke play, and let's say Bill is 60 feet away on the putting green, though, and I am still raking the bunker after I just played out of the bunker, and Bill doesn't want to wait for me to attend the flag stick. He just figures, 60 feet away, what are the odds that I'd actually strike the flag stick? So he goes ahead and putts. And while his ball is in motion, I think, oh my gosh, if Bill's going to incur a penalty if he strikes the flag stick. I rush over there and I remove the flag stick while the ball's in motion. Then I will be penalized, the person, his fellow competitor, the one who removed it, if at the moment I removed the flag stick, there was a reasonable possibility that that removal might influence the movement of the ball. So, meaning that, okay, where was the ball at that point? What line was it on? What was the pace? Was there a reasonable possibility it might have struck the flag stick? And at that point, I have to disregard what happens afterwards. If you look at decision, let's see, 17-2/2, which goes through this, and it makes the point in the answer, starting in the second sentence, the determination as to whether there is a reasonable possibility that the removal of the flag stick might have influenced movement of the ball is made by reference to the situation at the time the flag stick was removed. So you have to freeze things at the moment I remove the flag stick and say, okay, at that time, was there a reasonable possibility? Now, in this case, since the flag stick was removed before it was possible to know what the result of the stroke would be, and since the intention of the player making the stroke was to get the ball as close to the hole as possible, at the moment the flag stick was removed, it was reasonably possible that its removal might have influenced the movement of the ball. Therefore, the opponent loses the hole, and fellow competitor in stroke play incurs 2 penalty strokes. So that would be the ruling if at that moment looked like there was a chance the ball would get to the hole. Now, if the ball subsequently stops 5 feet short of the hole, that doesn't change the answer. What happens after I remove the flag stick, as a referee, you have to ignore in making that determination.
Given that decision, 17-2/2, let's change that to partner in a 4-ball.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned that, because especially those of you going to the PGA USGA class will see a series of slides in it that walk through a case where, say, Bill and I are now partners in 4-ball play, and while his ball's in motion, I run over and remove the flag stick. And there, what those slides will show is that that is really now just a breach of Rule 17-1, and the guilty player is actually the player, the person whose ball is in motion. There'd be no penalty on me, the person who that removed the flag stick. In that case. Mm-hmm.
Right.
And that's because it's no longer, quote, unauthorized. It needs to be authorized to be partner.
Well, it's not necessarily getting into that as much as it's still a breach for it to be moved while the ball's in motion, and it's a question of who should be penalized in that case. Whether should both of us be penalized, should just a player who made the stroke be penalized. And what the USGA would say is that the way Rule 17-1 is worded, that the player who made the stroke is penalized. And they would say that that would be a different result than, say, if Bill and I were partners, Bill putts while his ball is in motion, I go out and I remove a loose impediment that might influence the movement of the ball. Then the USGA would say, in that case, I, the person who moved the loose impediment, would be penalized, and that Bill would be penalized only if if my breach did in fact assist him. And that's something we can talk about later as well, comparing those two situations. All right, penalty for breach of Rule 17-1 or 17-2 is the general penalty. Now, 17-3, ball striking flagstick or attendant. It's fairly well known. Player's ball must not strike the flagstick when it's being attended, when it has been removed, so if it's just lying on the ground, or while it's being held up. Ball must not strike the person attending or holding up the flagstick or anything carried by him, or the flagstick in the hole unattended when the stroke has been made on the putting green. Exception is that when the flagstick's attended, removed, or held up without the player's authority, well, Rule 17-2 would apply. And then an interesting penalty statement: loss of hole, match play, stroke play, 2 strokes, and the ball must be played as it lies. So this would be a more specific approach that in some cases would override provisions of Rule 19. For example, ordinarily under Rule 19-1, if a stroke made from the putting green is deflected by a moving or animate outside agency, such as a live human being, then the player must cancel and replay that stroke. On the other hand, if that live human being was attending the flagstick and you struck him while he was doing that, then first you're penalized, and secondly, you don't cancel and replay. You play the ball as it lies. So a little bit of a difference there. And likewise, say if it's match play and your opponent is attending the flagstick, that Rule 17-3 would override Rule 19-3. You can't say, oh, gee, I struck my opponent, I get to cancel and replay. That is not the case.
How would a not so experienced rules person decipher the fact that 17-3 would override 19-1? Is there because it's more specific?
That's a good question. How would an inexperienced rules person know that 17-3 would override Rule 19-1? And at first I was hoping that there was an exception, but there's not. And the reason I say that is, for example, there is an exception under 19-3 and under 19-4. And I suppose... Oh, you're right, and under 19-1. Okay, good. All right, so that exception's in the middle. So that... All right, so there's a good answer for that one. Then
he would read the rules.
17-4, which is somewhat like Rule 16-2 in that it applies to a very specific fact situation. When a player's ball rests against the flagstick in the hole and the ball is not holed, so part of the ball is above the level of lip of the hole, the player or someone authorized by him may move or remove the flagstick. And if the ball falls into the hole, the player is deemed to have holed out with his last stroke. Otherwise, the ball, if moved, must be placed on the lip of the hole without penalty. So in most cases, the player should, with some care, be able to get the ball to fall into the hole. Otherwise, no penalty. Just make sure he places the ball on the lip of the hole and then taps in. So let's see. Decisions under 17. Decision 17-1/5 it's interesting that this question comes up a lot, and this is for some reason is a great misconception among golfers. Player holds the flagstick with one hand and holds a short putt, gripping the putter with the other hand. Is this permissible? Answer, yes. Provided the flagstick has been removed from the hole and the ball therefore does not strike it. So that is absolutely fine to do. Some people think that that's not okay for some reason, but that's fine.
I have a question on 7.3.3. Ball, flagstick laying on the putting surface while the player putts from the putting surface.
Okay.
In the state open a few years ago, the player was contesting for the championship. Hit par 5, hit his second shot on the green and had a downhill putt about 15 feet. Hole location was towards the end of it. So his caddy takes the flag out, but the player says, take flag out. And he lays it down on the edge of the green, the fringe. It's part on and part on. And he puts the ball and hits it too firmly, obviously, and it's slowing down and it's in jeopardy to possibly go past the hole and hit the thing. His caddy picks up the flagstick and moves it. Is there a violation there?
So he moves it while is in the. So he had.
After he strikes the.
So he had set the caddy had set the flagstick behind down before the stroke was made. Then the player played, and then the caddy moved the flagstick while the ball's in motion. Well, whether there's a penalty would depend as to when that occurred, because there was a change. If you look at Rule 24-1A, final paragraph, when a ball's in motion, an obstruction that might influence the movement of the ball other than equipment of any player or the flagstick when attended, removed, or held up must not be moved. So these days, and I can't remember if this took effect 2004, that today that would be okay to remove that flagstick that was lying on the ground.
2008.
It was 2008? Okay.
This was a few years ago, and
Okay.
I don't think
Yeah.
that.
But before that would have been a breach.
Yeah. But in this case, a spectator picked up the flagstick and moved it. Obviously, a friend of the player, and the ball did roll, beyond the hole, and whether it would have hit that flagstick laying there, it's just questionable like that. But in this case, the player looked around and said, "Is that a penalty?" I mean, somebody picked up the flagstick, and it was a spectator, outside agent. And we ruled it was not a penalty because of that. Now, then his dad.
And you can't. I hesitate to spend too much time talking about a case involving an old rule, but just to make sure people aren't confused. But I think back then you could argue, well, did the player authorize the spectator to do it? And if he didn't, then obviously you can't penalize the spectator
Now
or penalize the player.
Rule that would not
Yeah, regardless of who moved it. Okay. All right. Any questions on Rule 17? All right, if not, even though we're a little bit early, we will stop just because Rule 18 is a big rule. And our next session it's not next week, but 2 weeks, is it Thursday the 11th? Is that right? Yeah, I believe it's Thursday, February the 11th, normal times, and Bill will send out something about that, and we'll start with 3 big rules, 18, 19, and 20. And so we're at the halfway mark, 3 sessions down, 3 to go, and we're exactly halfway through the 34 rules, although we also covered the definitions, so we've covered a lot of material. And I know that we have a handful plus of people that are attending the USGA PGA class here in Milwaukee. I know, let's see, we have at least one person going to another class. Anybody going to another class outside of Milwaukee? Oh, okay. All right. Very well. Well, thanks everyone for coming. And as always, just please let Bill and me know what we can do to be more helpful next time.
Where's the USGA?
San Diego.
We have